there's a few things in this world that annoy me. One is when runners don't believe in themselves, which is a rip-off of a Ted Lasso quote. And the second one is when people don't critically analyze whether they actually need a running shoe rotation. So in this video, we're going to do some soul searching and tread around the topic as to whether you actually need a running shoe rotation, particularly for beginner or intermediate runners. So let's get stuck into it. So first off, what the heck is a running shoe rotation? So a running shoe rotation is basically where we have multiple pairs of running shoes that we use concurrently throughout our training week. So basically we have different pairs of runners for different run types. So for example, on a weekend, if you're doing your long run, you probably want something that's a little bit more supportive and has a lot more cushion. Whereas if you're doing a faster run during the week, whether that be an interval run or a time trial, whatever, then you probably want a faster shoe, which is most likely something with a carbon fiber plate these days. But basically the idea is that you have a specific shoe type for a specific run type essentially. And once you get a little bit more advanced, that it's definitely not a surprise to see some people have maybe 4 or 6 pairs of runners in their shoe rotation at any one time. So seriously, it can get out of hand pretty quick.
So who needs a running shoe rotation? Well, that's a good question. But the first question you need to ask yourself is, how seriously do I take my running? So if you're an elite athlete or sub-elite athlete, then you probably do need a running shoe rotation. And the reason why that is because your standard of performance or your training standards are already at such a high level that you probably need to look to other things to help boost it even further. So running shoes and having specific run shoes for run types is probably going to help or boost that or get you towards where you need to go. But for beginner to intermediate runners, who this video is targeted at, I don't think a running shoe rotation is necessary. And the reason why that is because when you're a beginner or intermediate, your training standard isn't really that high yet, which means you have such potential to grow with just consistent training, consistent strength training, and appropriate recovery. So the bang for your buck is very much still in the basics of your training and your strength training as well. And you're probably not going to get that same bang for buck just because you have different pairs of shoes. Like, you'll still probably improve regardless. So that's the reason I think, but let's get back to the desk. Ugh.
But what are the benefits of having a running shoe rotation? Well, the most logical argument that I can see and that I can understand is that you need a specific running shoe for a specific run type. So again, we touched on it before. Basically, if you're doing a long run on the weekend, then you probably want something with a little bit of cushion, a little bit of support when you're pounding the pavement. But when you're doing a faster run during the week, you probably want something that's going to give you a bit of punch off the ground, usually something with a carbon fiber plate. And then conversely, you also don't want to wear a carbon fiber plated shoe when you're doing an easy run or you're doing your long run on the weekend. You probably want a cushion shoe there. So it's also making sure you have the right shoe type for your run, and that's not an inappropriate choice at all. A common argument I also see is that having a running shoe rotation can you reduce your injury risk? And there's a popular research study which gets published on a wide variety of forums on the internet that states that runners within a particular study had a 40% less likely chance of getting injured compared to runners who only had one pair of running shoes within that study. So the rationale for this was that having multiple pairs of running shoes, which have different structures inherently, is going to help balance out the forces upon your lower limbs across the week, because you're going to be wearing one pair of running shoes on one day, which is going to affect your lower body muscles in particular segments. Whereas when you move to another shoe for a different day, then it's going to affect the body in different ways. So basically, all the different structures is going to even out the forces throughout the week, and potentially is going to give you a more, a stronger or more robust lower limb musculature, because you're having all these different stimuli and not necessarily overloading on the one, which is a little bit hard to sort of digest for me personally, but we'll get into that in a sec. So this is where it all gets a little bit clouded. So if you tread a little bit deeper into this research article from a journal, or a Scandinavian journal anyway, it says that the runners in the study who had multiple types of running shoes, or basically a running shoe rotation, were also significantly more experienced than those who only had one pair of running shoes. So in the previous 12 months of the study, they had done more half marathons and completed more training, which, as we spoke about, probably makes sense. If you're a more advanced runner or a more advanced athlete, you're probably more likely to branch out and try different things and look for different shoes that are going to push you along, or keep your gains trending in that right direction. But what's also interesting generally is that we know that more experience as a runner is probably going to make you a more durable athlete anyway. Now, this is a generalization, but I think it's a good one as well, is that once you have more experience, you're probably less susceptible to injury anyway. I know from my own experience, I'm probably a 5 times better runner now than what I was, 12 months ago. I probably don't have the same amount of injuries, more durable, probably stronger, and the magnitude of the injuries I get now is probably significantly less than what it was when I first started. So to say that just because you had multiple pairs of running shoes to me feels like a little bit of a stretch. Now I know that the study does try and say that experience wasn't a protective mechanism against injury, but for me, being around high performance sport and being around running for a bit now, it's sort of hard for me to not include the impact of experience on that. And I think if you look at the flip side, as a beginner runner or less experienced runner who's probably more likely to have one pair of running shoes, you probably make more common mistakes when you're first starting out as well. So you're probably doing too much too soon, too much volume, maybe not enough rest and recovery, maybe not enough strength training as well. So you're more likely to make those mistakes, which is probably going to lead you to an injury anyway, which, as I said, I've done, and you learn from those mistakes, which makes you more experienced and probably less likely to suffer those injuries in subsequent months and years. So why shouldn't you have a running shoe rotation? Well, I think the most pertinent and logical argument, particularly if you're a beginner to intermediate runner, is the expense of having a running shoe rotation. I think that you'd probably, you'd have 3 or 4 pairs of running shoes at least $200 a pop, and you're probably gonna have to rotate them at least twice or maybe 3 times a year. So that's at least a couple of $1,000s right off the bat, which you have to ask yourself whether the juice is worth the squeeze in that respect. And I don't necessarily think it is, because as I said, you can still get so much bang for your buck from your training, and that's going to give you, probably more improvements than having different pairs of running shoes, in my opinion only. However, I believe a good compromise is to get yourself a good daily trainer, which again is just jargon running term for having a shoe that you can use for basically all your run types that gives you enough comfort and support. So I think if you have one, if you can find one of them, maybe buy 2 pairs of that just so you don't wear it out too quick, then that's a good start. And once you get more experience with your running, maybe then going off and trying to identify a faster shoe for your races, which may have a carbon fiber plate or whatnot. That's probably a good starting point to having a good compromise as well, because that's generally, as a beginner to intermediate, that's probably all you really need, in all honesty. And also remember from that research paper that I referenced before, like the only real winner from those sort of studies are running shoe manufacturers. And I feel like the idea that you need multiple pairs of running shoes to help reduce your injury risk or whatever, it feels like a running shoe manufacturer made problem with a running shoe manufacturer made solution. And what I mean by that is that, people run bare feet still these days. They have minimalist shoes. 30 years ago, we were running in runners that were basically just a piece of rubber under your feet. So the body can and will adapt to most stresses that you place upon it, obviously, providing that you're sensible enough to go slow. So to say that having multiple pairs of running shoes is going to balance out your injury risks seems like a massive win for running shoe manufacturers, and not necessarily a win for those who are buying the shoes. Also, there's nothing wrong with just having one pair of running shoe. Like, I haven't seen any conclusive evidence that says that if you only wear one pair of running shoes that you're going to be at a higher chance of injury or whatnot. Like, that's not necessarily the case. As long as you rotate your runners when they're starting to get a bit worn out and they lose their traction, lose their support, then that's probably a time when you need to swap them out. But again, that's a problem that every runner faces regardless of how many running shoes they have. So to finish off, I just want to do a little bit of experiment that I did in my own time. So I went on my laptop and I typed into Google, do you need a running shoe rotation? Now, obviously this is Google within Australia. And one of the initial hits that came up was a hit from Asics. Now, I'm not bagging Asics at all. One of the 2 shoes I use in my rotation is the Super Blast, and I think it's a great shoe. But I'm just highlighting that running shoes are still severely impacted by marketing. So when you type that into Google, like I did, it came up with this article saying why you need a running shoe rotation, and basically went through all the key points as to why you need a running shoe rotation. Now, Asics aren't going to say, or they're not going to publish an article that says you only need one pair of running shoes, are they? They're not going to say that necessarily. Like, they're still in the business of selling running shoes. So that's something that you obviously need to be aware of. And I dare say within that article, there's probably a link to buy some shoes or whatnot. And it does reference the article that I've referenced already in this video as well about the protective mechanisms or whatnot. But again, that's just for me to show that, you know, we are still heavily influenced by marketing, particularly with running shoes, and obviously they help us, but you have to discern whether, you know, this is a marketing spin or whether it's actually needed and necessary for me. So to wrap up the video, here's some good shoe practices that you can use regardless if you have one pair of runners or you have multiple pairs of runners. So the first one is keep track of how many kilometers your shoes have done. So obviously miles if you're watching in somewhere where you use them imperial system, but 500 kilometers is usually the starting point for when you should start, you know, looking to trade your shoes in for a newer model. And then once it gets to that point, maybe look at, you know, trying to transition your new shoes in, or if you've got a couple of pairs of the same shoe, then maybe try and wear them, you know, in an ongoing fashion to balance out the wear and tear. The second one is buy a couple of pairs of running shoes when you found a good pair for you. So again, if you have a good daily trainer, then maybe try and buy a couple of pairs of them to space them out so you don't have to keep going back to the running shop and don't have to worry about whether the shoes are sold out or superseded or whatnot. The third one is only wear fast racing shoes when you're actually racing and doing time trials in preparation for races. So particularly shoes with a carbon fiber plate, don't necessarily wear them all the time, because we have seen some research that's come out that questions whether they can contribute to bone stress injuries, particularly in the feet, if you wear them too often. So just be aware of that. And then the last one is to tread your own path, which again is another cunning shoe pun that I've dropped in there. But again, don't spend money you don't have. Everybody has their different financial constraints. So buy what you think is necessary for you. And then, you know, don't worry that you don't have all the luxuries or whatnot. You don't have to have that at this point. But that's about it for this video. So remember to do some soul searching and tread your own path. And now that I've officially run out of running shoe related puns, it's time to wrap up the video. But good luck on your own running journey. I hope you got something out of the video and get stuck into it and make running great again. So we'll see you soon.